Hello. So today's subject I want to discuss confrontation in the context more of arguments than actual physical confrontation, although we can reflect on the umbrella concept. Um, I want to talk about how sometimes confrontation, verbal confrontation, is better to avoid rather than wanting to prove a point. Now, in human discourse, when people have a disagreement about something, especially if it's something emotive, then there is a sort of, I feel, ego at play. Um, and it usually lies in a sort of inner determination to not necessarily get the other person to see one's point of view, but to vindicate one's own point of view by basically dominating the argument, so to speak. But I feel there are circumstances when the more intelligent option is actually to walk away, or sometimes to seek a compromise, seek the peace. Um, for somebody who has a lot of opinions, believe it or not, I don't actually like confrontation. That may seem a bit surprising because I make all these videos and I have a lot of opinions, but I don't actually enjoy confrontation. And if I was going to the pub, for example, I wouldn't particularly talk about the sort of issues that I raise in these videos because it's a complete different format. If I was in the pub, I would probably talk more about down to earth issues, or not down to earth, but more, let's say, less politically topical issues. I would talk more about things that aren't that controversial. In my YouTube channel, I discuss a lot of issues that are taboo, and it's not to get attention, it's because I believe it's a good vacuum to a good medium to air my views on those matters, and I want to exercise my freedom of expression. Um, and I think this is a good way to do so. But I want to talk about how there is this sort of notion that we always have to feel that in order to win an argument or in order to have a sense of being right, that we have to get into a situation of verbal confrontation. I don't think it should have to be the case that every time you hear someone you disagree with, you have to confront them or they have to confront you. Um, because otherwise, you're constantly going to be at loggerheads. There are times I feel when the better option is to walk away. Now, some would say this is cowardice. I'm not so sure about that. Um, we should be careful about throwing that word around because cowardice does exist in certain contexts. There are things that can be construed to be cowardly, attacking a more vulnerable person, for example, um, letting someone else take the blame for something you're responsible for. Those are cowardly actions. But walking away from a confrontation situation, I don't think is necessarily cowardly. And I get a little annoyed at this, in my view, childish notion of who wins an argument or who doesn't win. Now, clearly, there is certain levels of this to speak about because legislators, people in the public arena, politicians, people running for high office, they need to put their ideas out to the public and they need to engage in debate with their political opponents. Um, I don't think you can get into politics if you don't enjoy debate because it is absolutely a central part of it. Or at least, if not enjoy it, at least be okay with it. I don't think any politician can get into the political arena if they feel uneasy debating their points of view. Um, and it isn't necessarily a case of not having conviction and not believing those points of view, but actually knowing that you're in a frankly confrontational situation. That's why I always say to be a politician, you need tough skin, because you will have your opponents, you'll have the media, and large number of the public ridiculing you, calling you all the names under the sun, and having conviction in those circumstances does takes tough skin. But as a wider rule, leaving aside politicians because they have a unique job where they're basically paid to debate in public. Essentially, when it comes down to it, that's what being a politician is. um, putting forward your ideas, debating your ideas, and arguing that those ideas are better for the greater good of society. But on a more down to earth basis, i.e., for those of us who aren't elected officials, is it necessary to always have to get into a debate format? Um, I think there are times when you're simply not going to convince the other person, and they're not going to convince you. And in those circumstances, it is better to walk away. I don't think that should be seen as an action of a card. I don't think it should be seen as something that is anything to be ashamed of. If anything, it is simply a practical realization. We've aired our differences, it's got heated, and we're not going to resolve this. So let's agree to disagree. I have been in, speaking candidly, heated back and forth debates online, and ultimately I said what I had to say, they said what they had to say, and it went back and forth. And ultimately, I just gave a closing argument. And it wasn't a case of I'm completely right and you're completely wrong. It was more a case of saying, this is my point, but ultimately, nothing I say is going to convince you, nothing you say is going to convince me. And of course, there's another aspect to this, which is the context of the debate itself. You can have a heated debate which is still mature, but then you can get confrontational situations where one person or the other opens up with mudslinging, it gets very personal. Those sort of debates are definitely not going to go anywhere because then ego is involved and it no longer even becomes about the principal arguments, but about simply outdoing one another's intelligence, really, who can come up with the wittiest insult, who has the moral high ground and all this sort of thing. So it no longer becomes a civil case of being involved in a discourse that is different opinions, but just trying to prove a point, and that's unfortunate. Now, I would like to say that I've always risen above that, but I would be a liar if I said that. I have been in those sort of debates, and I try to avoid them these days because it doesn't lead to anything productive. It is very, very tempting at times when you see someone come out with a statement that is, in what in your own thinking, outrageous, and you want to confront them. It happens all the time. I think it also goes without saying that the context of this is very different online than it is in the real world. I suspect most people, it's not necessarily a case that they don't believe the things they're saying, but I think in the real world, they would say them in a slightly different way, certainly a more moderate way. And I'm not saying that's universal. Certainly, you get heated confrontations in the real world scenario, but a lot of the things that people say online, I think certainly in the UK, people are a bit more polite in real life. Not saying all the time, but whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. Some would say it's insincere. I don't know about that. I think you can be sincere and stand by your conviction whilst also avoiding that sort of nature of confrontation. Um, I have been in situations, for instance, and even getting into a more personal example, I've been in situations where I've fallen out with friends over misunderstandings, over different points of view, and on more than one occasion it's got a little bit heated. Now, I always found myself being the one wanting to seek the peace. And it might be because I deeply value friendship, but I think it's also because for me it wasn't a case of selling my soul and pretending something that I'm not and saying, oh, well, you're completely right and I'm completely wrong, and sort of basically, trying to brush everything under the carpet to make the peace. It's more a case of having it out of the way and then acknowledging that and then moving on and saying, look, we've had this disagreement, but doesn't mean we have to hate each other. It doesn't mean that we have to have animosity. In fact, that's happened today. I had a back and forth argument with a friend. It was nothing to do with politics, it was more just personal issues. But ultimately, I ended up apologizing to her, and it wasn't a matter of insincerity. I genuinely felt that some of the things I had said, I had been too sensitive and I'd taken it the wrong way, so I apologized for that reason. My point is that we have this tendency to assume that the more intelligent option and the more strong option is always out arguing the other person. The point I'd like to make is sometimes it is okay to be modest and step back and apologize and say, well, maybe I was wrong about that, or we're not going to agree. Let's just change the subject. I really don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I can honestly say that all the friends I have, would they agree with me on all my positions? Certainly not. But does that mean that we're not going to be friends? Definitely not. And I would be saddened if they felt that to be the case, that if we had a difference of view, then we couldn't be friends. I have friends who are left wing, right wing, centrist, and I have friends from all over the world from a wide variety of backgrounds. And I'm not saying that to be politically correct. It's just the facts. Um, you know, the point my friend made earlier, and she was right about this. In the context of a friendship, you can't always have a situation where you constantly agree with each other, because there will be situations where you disagree about based on a misunderstanding or based on a difference of view about something, and I think that's okay. The important thing is not to let it get to a point where it really damages the friendship. And if it does look like the differences are irretractable and you're constantly arguing, I guess this applies in any human relationship, whether it be a romantic relationship or a friendship. When you get to the point where it's constantly arguments and constantly having to explain a misunderstanding, then it gets to the point where it's awkward. Now, with the person I'm talking about, I have the confidence that I've known her long enough that today's back and forth is not going to be a major issue. We've already made up, and now it's my responsibility to not care too much about it. One of my flaws is I overthink things, and something that I'm trying to improve. But what I would say is that avoiding confrontation is not a bad thing. There are times, in this world, everyone has opinions about something. And we form our opinions based on a wide variety of sources, based on influence, based on peer influence, based on media influence. But ultimately, we are all, if you want to look at it in the most raw, basic sense, we're all born into this world and we all go through a life journey. And most people just want to be content and to reach their goals and to get through life as trouble free as possible. Now, that is a basic human desire, and I don't see any reason why you can't have opinions on something and be opinionated and have conviction, whilst also knowing when to have confrontation and when not to. Now, from my point of view, if someone has a different point of view from me and they say, look, I don't want to talk about it, I always respect that. And I get frustrated when people, when I've told them I disagree with their point and they try to convince me, and it might be a particular occasion when I simply want to relax and I don't want to talk about a loaded political subject. I just want to relax and drink my coffee or whatever it is. And then the person insists on trying to convince me, and that's um, that's something I find quite unacceptable, and that's why I was critical of the approach certain evangelical Christians take. Made a video about that a while back because they don't really take no for an answer. They just want to keep trying and trying and trying. And I'm not talking about everyone, but there are a few people who have that mindset. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on this subject. Thanks for watching. By the way, one last point. That's the other reason why I don't always reply to comments. I allow comments on my channel to show that I am not a dictator. I allow different points of view. But another reason I don't always reply to comments is I simply don't always want to have the back and forth of arguing a point with someone. And I know not all the comments are negative. I know there's plenty of comments that agree with me. But the reason I sometimes avoid the critical comments is not because I'm disrespecting the person's opinion or the right to have an opinion. It's simply because I can't be bothered, frankly, to have an argument. So that's how I feel about it. Let me know your thoughts.